starting the afternoon session now with Dr. Brad Peterson. He's going to fill us in on the impacts on seagrass, and he was part of a project that I mentioned before the break, which was the Special Focus Area project that looked at nutrients, shellfish, SAV, and other characteristics going east to west across the whole bay system. And so that formed a nice baseline that hopefully you can start comparing to now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brad.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll talk about seagrass, submerged aquatic vegetation as a function of the breach. First, let me set the stage for you. There's a conceptual model that seems to have panned itself out as a very common occurrence in estuaries where seagrasses go from nutrient limited. As we increase the nutrients available either through foliar uptake or through the sediments, we see an increase in their productivity. But as we increase that, continue to increase that nutrients, we see things like epiphytes and macroalgae starting to come and have a negative impact on the grass. But eventually, at a certain level of nutrient enrichment, we go from a benthic to a pelagic production, where we lose all of the seagrass. Cornelia had mentioned a project that Chris Gobler and I did in 2004 and 5, and what we had done was use distance from breaches to look at some of these. What you're looking at here is distance from breach. We did this in both Shinnecock and in Great South Bay. And as we got further and further away from the breach, we saw that the chlorophyll increased. But not only that, we saw that the proportion of smaller particles in that also increased. And at the same time, there was a decrease in production of the seagrasses that were below that. Well, that's not uncommon. Seagrasses are kind of the canary in the mine. They require much more light than other marine plants do, and so therefore they're the ones that are first affected by changing light levels. Eelgrass requires more than 20% light. And because of this requirement of the plants for amount of light reaching the sediment surface for them to exist, they're a good model organism to look at as seeing changes that are occurring in estuaries. One of the things that Chris had put together when we were doing that project back in 2004 and 5 is looking at the amount of light, surface light reaching the bottom, and near the inlets, look at a 20% level of light. We see that in the back bays it was restricted to below a meter. Right, so that's meaning that you have to have grass in areas that are less than a meter deep for them to get enough light requirement for them to be able to metabolically exist there. So near the breach, we had areas where we had low phytoplankton biomass due to flushing, lots of light available, rich seagrass resources, and then all the associated benefits in the community of them being present there. And as we moved away, we increased the biomass, reducing the light, shading it out, and losing all of our seagrass. And so the question was, okay, what would happen then if we had a breach? What would happen to the reduction of the phytoplankton biomass and then the concomitant change on the eelgrass? Well, because seagrass is a model organism, the Park Service back in 2007 began monitoring resources in the parks where seagrasses existed. One of those is Great South Bay. And they have a three-tiered approach in their monitoring effort. The largest tier is using things like remote sensing, aerial photography to look at the resources available. As you get smaller in the extent, we then do like a rapid survey where now instead of just images, we actually go and we get a measurement of the percent cover and the biomass of the grass. And at the very top, at a few sentinel sites, you go and you measure a lot of things. So this was three-tiered. As you go from tier 3 to tier 1, you increase the spatial representation, but as you go from 1 to 3, you increase the amount of data that you're collecting. And that was the model that they created for looking at seagrass in their parks. At the tier 2, what we call the rapid seagrass assessment, from Fire Island Inlet to Center Mauritius, the boundaries of the park is broken up into 200 hexagons. Each one of those hexagons, a random site was established, and then we repeatedly go back to those sites from year to year, starting in 2007, every other year up till present. And at those sites, we would get things like organic carbon on the sediments, cover of the grass, shoot biomass of the grass. And in 2009, we also looked at the amount of sulfide in the pore water, as well as taking genetic samples of the seagrasses that were present in those locations. Now, prior to the breach, we're looking at two different types of grass. On this side is the eelgrass, and over here is the widgeon grass, or rupia. What I'm trying to demonstrate are two main points from this graph. One is we've got eelgrass predominantly down here by the inlet, and we also have some in this area. The widgeon grass, or the rupia, is constrained to this area, which also happens to be the area where we have the largest influence of some fresh water coming in, and also the hottest water where it's present on the shallow shoals there. Now, one thing you notice as we go from 2007 to 2009, you see a slight increase in both widgeon or rupia and eelgrass. And if you were paying attention to Dobler's talk previously, he had mentioned that there was no brown tide in 2009. What you're looking at here is a response of the grass to just clearer water, more light availability. So we see these changes. And this is, before the breach, we continued to compare these 200 hexagons between 2007 and 2009. We see that there was gains in most places. Again, this is gains in percent coverage. And if we look at each of these regions, see there was a significant increase in eelgrass in this area, so that's percent cover, and then an increase in this area. If we look at rupia, again, it's predominantly found over here, but we did see an increase between those years. What I think it gives insight into what was going on in the decades previous to the breach is this figure here. What you're looking at is a surface of light. So that blue color is where there's more than 22% of the light reaching the surface. And all the yellow dots are dots that represent areas where we have gains. And what you'll notice, they all occur in areas where we had more than 22% light. But I want you to focus your attention on the red dots. And when you look at those red dots, this is where we lost eelgrass. And they're all located in areas where we are very shallow water, areas where the water is very warm. And what that gives you insight into is in the previous decades, what we saw is that the eelgrass has moved from the depths into the shallows because it's been shaded. Needed more light, had to get into shallower areas. As it got into those shallower areas, and now it came into shoals that would accumulate hot water during the summer, and it was squeezed between being really, really warm or not getting enough light. And that was the area where we found eelgrass existing. Now, you've seen water quality changes, but I'm going to focus your attention on 2 points. I'm looking at stations here that are only found within this box, the area of the breach. These box plots show the county data, the data that we have been collecting. Again, this data is only coming through the index period of the month of July, because that's when we do our water quality, we do our seagrass assessment. We have maximal amount of seagrass, so only in the month of July. Pre-breach, here is 2013 post-breach, and this is an ocean station. The point I'm bringing is that there was almost a 5% PSU increase in salinity in that area adjacent to the breach, and there was about a 3 °C decrease in water temperature in that area. Both of those have really important impacts when we start comparing things like eelgrass and rupia. Now, I should have brought a picture because I'm not sure that everyone here even knows what I'm talking about when I use the term eelgrass and rupia. Eelgrass is a marine plant. It goes about this tall. Okay? It's big, strap-like. It's really great. Lots of things like to hide in it. It's a good nursery roll. Okay? Rupia grows this tall. Much shallower. Much more fine. And so the differences between eelgrass and rupia are very significant on the kinds of roles they play as giving three-dimensional structure on the bottom for organisms to use, right? And what I'm telling you now is that rupia likes lower salinity, and they can handle warmer waters. And if you were keeping in mind those figures that I showed you earlier before the breach of where we found rupia, it was in that area where the breach occurred, which was where there was warm water and lower salinity. Now we have the breach occurring, and we see a big change in those two parameters. If we look at the differences between 2009 and 2013, the point of this is that there was a lot of loss of seagrass. This loss in seagrass was all driven by sanding. There were a number of sites where there's a lot of sand overwash. There were areas where sites that used to be seagrass were now exposed as sand shoals. There was a lot of biomass that was removed, being ripped up by the wave energy. And so 2013, what we reflect is the damage of the storm. And if we plot up kind of pre-storm percent cover in this region, here was 2013, we start to see some recovery this last year. Biomass is picking back up in those areas, places that were overwashed with sand. It wasn't sufficient to smother it out, and now they're coming back up through that. You see there was never really much grass in this area. As we move over to the area of the breach, we don't see really any change between 2013 and 2014 for eelgrass at our fixed sites. And in this area, we had low eelgrass at our sampling sites. And I'm showing you these dots pattern. What I'm trying to show you is that the sites where there was eelgrass, we start to see more biomass accumulating in those sites. But the mean value didn't change. Now, if we change that to rupia, what's interesting is, we had, this is now, breach was here, right? So we had rupia present in this area where it was known to be, and now in 2014, we see that there's been a substantial decrease in the amount of rupia found in the area where the breach is occurring. Now, I think that what we're seeing right here is a direct response to this colder, more saline water on the rupia present in those sampling stations that we went to. Another thing I want to just point out, part of our water quality monitoring is we measure light levels. And in 2013, after the breach, we have light here, the yellow and green here, clear water, but then you see these yellow values here in KD. KD is a measure of how much light is reaching the bottom. And if we put it on a scale like this is looking at colonization depth of eelgrass and its impact of light attenuation due to KD. This is what, this is kind of the level, the depth at which we could colonize grass 2009, previous to the breach in that area. And then we see an increase. Now this is the scale here is a log scale, so it's not quite a doubling. We're basically going to a little bit over a meter to roughly about 2 meters, almost a doubling of the amount of light. And I'll show you this in a different way that might be more easy for you to think about. This is a picture of the breach. And if you look at all those red dots on the breach, what we're saying is, if we compare 2009 to 2013, these are all areas where the light level increased. The light level was now gained and is above what is required for grass to grow. So if you summed up all those red boxes, we have about 1 kilometer of bottom that now went from not enough light for eelgrass to exist to now there is enough light for there to exist there. The Tier 3, well, that was all from the rapid assessment. Tier 3 is you go to a particular location, you measure a lot of parameters at one location, kind of the sentinel site. And as fate would have it, our sentinel site was about 1 kilometer to the west of where the breach occurred. We've been going there on a yearly basis since 2007. So what you see from here, we're looking only at eelgrass, and we're comparing up in the shallows and then down in the deeper transect. What you see is that 2007, 2009, 2010, we were continuing to lose the eelgrass as it was migrating up out of that deeper transect into even shallower depths. The red's now the rupia. In the shallows, it dominates up there. We saw a transition to having more rupia here prior to the breach, and then the breach occurred and it was all gone. This loss here, I believe, was from sand scouring at our location there. I think we just tore up the grass that was present there. Another prediction that was made in the handout that you have in your from the previous breach report was that the breach would cause a scouring or an increasing of the grain size. And so what I'm showing you is the organic content of sediments at the sites where we've been going. And what was interesting to me was that we never ever found seagrass where there was more than 2% organic matter. I think what we're seeing here is that the plant's inability to exist with this shaded nature with the sulfides in the sediments below it. And this is interesting. I'll show you some data. This came from Massachusetts. Kinworthy and Gallegos had done some work where they were looking at the amount of light required at the deep growing edge based on the organic matter. And as the organic matter increased, what you saw was the amount of light went from 15 up to 30% of the incident light required. So the plant needed to have more light to deal with this higher organic matter. So if the scouring of the sediment occurs, if we decrease our organic matter, we would expect to see a positive effect on the seagrass. Now I want to show you a series of images now to make a point. I told you in 2009 that we had also gone out and we'd taken genetic samples of the seagrasses in Great South Bay. Before we did this, right, my mind said to me, in the 1930s we had a labyrinthula disease that wiped out 80% of the eelgrass in Great South Bay. In the 80s we had brown tide that then shaded the eelgrass. So in my mind, all we have left are labyrinthula-resistant, shade-adapted genotypes of eelgrass, right? And we went out there and we found that was absolutely positively not the case, and I was entirely wrong, okay? What we found was that there was so little clonality in our eelgrass beds that you could take 3 steps away from where you're standing and take a sample, and you never found another genotype, right? What that's telling you is that our eelgrass is expanding not by vegetative growth, not by clonal growth in our system, it's all through seed, right? So now I want you to pay attention. This is not an image from Great South Bay, this is an image from Shinnecock, but it's the South Shore estuary, and I think the principle is the same. The blue there represent eelgrass patches in 2001 in this location. As we jump from 2001 to 2007, what you see, as we go from 1 to 7, you see that some patches wink in and out. We see some expansion of the patches that were there. But from 2007 to 2009, what you've just seen is an incredible seed set that occurred in 2009, right? And then from 2010, so in the previous 7 years, you saw very little change. 2009, we go to 10, we go to 11, we go to 12, and you see an incredible expansion of the grass present there because the good seed set, fine water quality. Now I raise this to you because there's an emerging story that you've heard over and over and over again that has to do with where the breach is and the changing water quality as you go from the breach to the east to Moriches. And although my fixed locations that I went to and saw, where grass changes, I would drive through patches of grass, fields of grass that did not exist there last year to my location where there was still no grass. And so what I'm telling you is that there's a great expansion of eelgrass from the breach over to Center Moriches that was obvious this year. Also, on those transects that I was talking about, the deep and the shallow transects, there were a number of seedlings. They weren't on the transect, but the part of the protocol is you do the transect and then you swim shallower until you find your first evidence of grass, right? And as I'm swimming that transect up to the higher, shallower depth, I noticed a number of seedlings of eelgrass that had sprouted. So I think we're seeing a response of the seeds in that area. So the conclusions, based on what was in the report, some ideas of what would happen. The thought in there, and the report focused primarily on the impacts of light clarity. And what would happen if we had a breach? Would it dilute the phytoplankton? Would we increase light levels? And yes, that is what we saw. So that prediction was true. But 2 of the things that weren't addressed in the report, which I think were very critical for eelgrass and for rupia, is the dramatic changes we've seen in salinity and in temperature. Both of which I think are going to drive the system, particularly in the area where the breach is, from a rupia-dominated area to an eelgrass-dominated area. There's still going to be shallow refuges where the water's still too hot that eelgrass isn't going to exist. So I think that we're going to see an expansion of eelgrass in that area. There was a significant loss of seagrass due to the storm by sand overwash and sediment resuspension or movement, but we start to see some recovery in those areas. So that's what I have. Yeah, Carl.
Maybe you can answer this, but what kind of, if conditions stay the way they have been the last few years, what kind of time response are you?
Well, I was trying to get that from the issue that we had on the thing. I think if we have a seed germination event, which is, I think, what we actually saw in Center Moriches going over, because we saw grass that were in places that had not been there before, and it wasn't that they had grown out a number of feet, because things had sense. So I think in a relatively short period of time, like 2-3 years, we would start to see big expansions of grass in that area. I'm not sure how far to the west it's going to extend, but I think in the area to the east we will see that. One thing too that I think was interesting to me is we had an incredible set of blue mussels, and perhaps that's going to be mentioned later, so I want to talk about it. But the blue mussels by the breach extended well into August, even to the hottest part of the water, and were not knocked off. So these temperature changes during the hardest time of the water for grass are really, I think, important for us. Yeah?
What do you think contributed to the massive germination of the eelgrass seeds?
I think it was light. So here's one. Seeds only last about 2 years, okay, in the bank. So it's not like you have a seed bank that's going to be there for decades. So what part of the problem is, if there's no seeds now, right, we got great light, they're not going to germinate. And that's why I think we saw the biggest response in the area where there's the most eelgrass now. And so the seeds that had been let out the year before then germinated this year. I think it will move, but I think that it would be really interesting to actually put some seeds out in some known locations along the transect and see how they respond to this light level. Yes?
In the flood delta of the breach, we have, pure sand. I don't know if there's any biology or organic material in it. Is that good substrate for eelgrass?
But not if it moves, right? But here, think about the island that's right off the wash there. The one that's to the east a little bit. This year there was a huge amphipod tube bed that kind of came up there. We thought it was grass, so we got in and started working on it. So it responded well. And then what we saw were that there were seedlings that were among those tube things. So biology might hold some of that would then trap seeds in that high quality water there. But as we go, in your fan idea, as you move to the west of the fan, right over in this area right here, so here's where we saw lots of patches, which I thought was grass, all turned out to be blue mussels, right? But as we went all the way over to here, we started seeing more and more eelgrass shoots, seedlings, coming up in here that I hadn't seen before. And I think we'll see it again if it continues to stay open.